Welcome to Stories That Stick, a podcast series about the stories that shape us.
It's really, to me though, it's about how we narrativize our relationships, how we self-mythologize, and the ways, especially in your 20s, you're kind of making yourselves and making each other up.
Hey everyone, it's Ade here, your host for Stories That Stick podcast. In today's episode, we have Amber Medland, the author of Wild Pet, which is a story that follows three graduates entering the real world in a time of Trump and Me Too. And it's a great read, trust me. Now, as per usual, we have our guest, in this case Amber, share her career journey to date whilst regaling some of the stories that made a big impact on her life. And if you're brand new to this podcast, please know that we start all our conversations talking about death because we believe it informs how we live. And after all, this podcast is a brief snapshot of our guest's life. That being said though, if you are triggered by death as a topic, then please do skip ahead approximately 3.5 minutes or when you hear the page turning sound effect. One more thing, please do share this episode to those who might enjoy it and or subscribe to the podcast because it really does help us grow. Now, without further ado, here's Amber Medland. Hey Amber, first and foremost, welcome to Stories That Stick.
Thank you.
Now, off the mic, you've mentioned you actually have listened to a couple of episodes, so I'm really glad of that. Therefore, the very first question that I get out the gate is surrounding the topic of death. How do you feel about death?
I love this question, and it made me laugh a lot when I saw it because I think about death a lot, which now is a good thing, but when I was a kid it's a real problem because if you don't have that much control over your daily life and you're intensely aware that you are going to die within a finite time, then it's just like, why should I spend 5 hours in this classroom if I may die tomorrow? Like, it's not a helpful way of thinking. But as an adult, it's actually really good because if you're aware of it, you work harder for starters and you're much more aware of moments for joy. My boyfriend says it's invigorating to be around, so that's reassuring.
So does it sort of inform how you live and go about living?
Yeah. So I'm very structured about my time, partly because I have ADHD and I have to be to get stuff done. But I have a lot of lists. I wish I could be more spontaneous, but I'm just not as a person. I have things that I want to achieve pretty much every day, and that is linked to the mortality awareness. But it's
so when you go on, apologies.
Sorry, no,
this is a conversation, so forgive me if I interject, but also tell me to shut up. Like, Ade, I haven't finished my sentence, so please continue.
I'm not great at finishing sentences, but it's not. It is generally a positive thing because it's not something I'm scared about. Like, it's not an oppressive thing. It's just a very much seize the moment drive.
Carpe diem kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
The reason I ask this usually though, and again, it isn't a morbid question, not intentionally anyway, it's often because this is a sort of podcast that gives a snapshot of my guest's life. And so I'm often asking and prompting, do you want a legacy? Do you want to be known? And if the answer is yes, what would you like people to know about you?
That's interesting because obviously legacy and thinking about death, I guess, should be connected, but it's not really, I never really think of it like that. I think that I like the idea of distilling an experience that is very much bound up with your present moment. Equally, if I knew that in however many years Wild Pets had been a really great thing but was no longer around, that doesn't bother me as a thought. The thing that always freaks me out most is the idea that if just before you die you're just like, fuck, sorry, can I swear?
Yeah,
but that thing terrifies me more than anything, which I think it would for most people if they thought about it. Like, it's a scary notion.
Well, let's then figure out all the things that you have done and you're not regretful of, hopefully. Or if you are, you know what, it's still good content. So how I normally start is usually we go through the chapters of your life, but let's go through the first chapter, which is the first decade, which is 0 to 10. So, Amber, you've got to tell us, who were you as a young girl? Where were you? Where did you like grow up? Give me like your family background, and yeah, we'll take it from there. Just give
Okay,
us a little bit about
0
you.
to 10. I have
Yeah.
comically few memories outside books and food of these years, but the basics would be that I grew up. So I was born in London, but I grew up in Kent.
Right. Okay.
My mother is Indian and my dad is British. But my mother left India like late teens, so my grandparents were, and my family is there.
Right. Right.
And I went like every summer growing up. I read a lot. Like I really, that was
Yeah.
when you were talking
I
about
was.
childhood books, I was just like, oh, so many books.
Yeah, I'm often curious to know when people say they read a lot, what does that really entail? Because how do we measure or qualify a standard of a
Yeah,
lot? So, what does that look like for you when you said that?
I think it's for me that when I started thinking about it, because my other memories are not very well defined, it's the fact of having like multiple books that I remember properly and I remember how I felt when I read them. So that feels like a
Mm,
kind of a measure of time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, feeling definitely does give us that, timestamp, for lack of a better term,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
great.
completely, completely.
But so you're mixed, you've got dual heritage.
Yes.
Have you come across, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you're on a platform called Blacticulate, but have
Yeah.
you have you ever been told you're white passing?
Yeah, I've had pretty much every possible response you can imagine to. So, first of all, my skin changes colour quite a lot in the sun, and there's a funny thing where I get mistaken from being from a lot of different places,
Right,
which
yeah.
can be quite strange. But because of that, yeah, I think people have a lot of different perceptions, and I'm definitely am also white passing. So
But how did you navigate that space? Were you ever othered, especially in this decade?
I was talking to my I was talking to my best friend about this, and we've been best friends since we were 11, and she was at school with me, and I was saying that I don't remember having. I got bullied at school, but my school was a mean place, so a lot of people got bullied, and I was saying that I didn't remember like there being any specific experiences to do with that, and she looked at me kind of incredulously and reminded me that there was one boy who called me a packy a fair amount, but he also said so many other horrible things that in my
Right.
mind as a teenager I was just like I it didn't it didn't hurt me. It wasn't pleasant, but it
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah.
It didn't stick as such, which is
Yeah.
absolutely fine. But we are still in this decade. So I'm hearing that you're in Kent.
Yes.
It's been blissful. You are reading a lot. And we definitely will get into the books in which you've submitted. But I still want to just make sure I'm not leaving any stone unturned as such.
Yeah.
So I'm picturing you with your dad and mum in Kent, brothers,
uh
sisters.
so
And
yeah, my parents split when I was 2. So
sorry.
there's that. No, it's fine, I guess. But I guess seminal things that happen before you're 10, that was a big one. And he remarried, and it was all just typical divorce stuff. I guess that was probably quite a big part of my childhood. I don't know anyone with good divorce stories. It's just
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I do neither. That's a great point. Okay, let's see if we can get into your book quite quickly. So we are still in the first decade, right? And fond memories. Any fond memories during this decade though?
0 to 10 or 10
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. 0 to 10. One of your fondest memories. If you look back, if I was to even think of a picture that you have in mind during this decade, what was going on? What was Did you
I
have any?
There was a willow tree in our old garden. That was a kind of willow tree where when you sit underneath it, all the like green fronds come down around you, so you're like in a kind of completely enclosed but light filled
Ooh.
space. And I spent a lot of time there. So it's things like that.
That sounds kind of enchanted. What were
It
you
was.
doing? Were you just thinking about worlds, or whilst there? You just got
Honestly, I was
lost.
probably reading, or like I had a lot of imaginary games by myself. I liked to try and find birds' nests. I was kind of a weird kid now I think about it, but yeah.
No, far from, far from. But speaking of reading, And for those of you guys who come into this podcast brand new, what I tend to do with all my guests is I get them to answer a very brief questionnaire. It's literally 3 questions where I ask them about the fondest stories they heard, read, or watched as a child, a teenager, or an adult. And Amber, for a child, do you remember what you submitted?
I went with The Wolves of Willoughby Chase. I had a massive list and I decided to go for that one.
I can imagine if you were continuously reading. So why did you go for The Wolves of Willoughby Chase? What was it about this story? And for those of us who haven't heard the story, do you mind giving us a synopsis and overview and why it made an impact in your life in this decade?
So it's by Joan Aiken and it's about 2 little girls called Sylvia and Bonnie, and Sylvia is an orphan, Bonnie is not, and Sylvia is very like shy and meek, and Bonnie's very boisterous and also like comes from a really rich family and she just has everything, and Sylvia goes to live with them. After that, it's just kind of an adventure. The governess stages a thing where she makes it seem as if Bonnie's parents have been killed at sea, and so they're both orphans, and then they go on the run together, and it's a lot of adventure.
Nah, amazing. And why did it have an impact on you? Do you know, if you're looking at it with adult eyes?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the ones that I find myself rereading whenever I'm home, which is one of the reasons I chose it. It's just intensely comforting. I think female friendships, I love those friendships. And so I think maybe they were an early prototype for that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I absolutely love that. And you're right, women friendships, you barely see that as, main characters, right? In books, unfortunately. Patriarchy. But we won't get into that yet. So I would like us to go into our next chapter, which is 10 to 20. Talk about a decade, of a life transforming decade, because you are going from prepubescent to puberty through the education system, and technically you're meant to become a full-fledged adult who has everything together. Was that the case for you, Amber? Talk to us about this decade. Where were you? Were you still in Kent? What was secondary school like for you? Paint pictures.
It's crazy as a decade. It's just the most compressed. Just a lot happens. And I'm in puberty, but also just general. So I went to a school that was like 10 minutes walk from my house. And I had there was the kind of English teachers that shape your life. I had 2 of those.
Oh, amazing. So you're gravitating to English as a subject from the jump, was it?
Very much so. I think it was the only class I never skived, essentially, because everything just made sense there. And I had both teachers, Mrs. Henshaw and Mr. McAlpine. They treated like everyone like adults with things that were interesting to say in a school that was quite concerned about appearances and just... It was a weird place, but in those rooms, it really was all about the books and about the individuals there, which was just very refreshing.
Nice.
I met my longest friend like the first day of school, and we're still she lives around the corner, in fact, and we're just still very, very close. So there were some good things.
Were you thinking career, profession at this stage? Was there any, pressures from family to become something? Were you becoming... I'm throwing a lot of things, and I don't really want to anchor. I'd rather you just go off on one. But
okay, I can do that.
You can do that? Okay, go
off
on
no,
one.
I wish I had like a massive mental whiteboard, because it is so much happens in that time. So I've always wanted to be a writer. It used to drive my mother crazy because people would be like, what do you want to be? But at like careers situation, but I'm going to be a writer. Like that was always I've always been sure of that. I wrote 2, when I say novels, they were not novels, but I was writing things that were meant to be novels in that time. One was called Trapped in the Net, which I think we can be glad I've not tried to publish that one. And the other was called Grey Quicksand. But they were, when I was writing them, the thing of being completely absorbed and focused and losing track of time. And that was when I started experiencing that feeling, which once you felt it, you never, ever want to stop. Yeah, exactly. So that was, definitely a highlight of that period.
That being said,
I guess India is the other. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of this like writing, and then India is probably the other big. Was like my strongest memories are, I think, possibly because we went for a few weeks every year and everything was suddenly just brighter and louder and more. I remember those visits very.
Well, speak on it. I mean, speak more on it. So you go to India like on your holidays frequently, like every year at least, or
We went to see my grandparents
yeah.
for the whole of my teenage years, and I just I loved it, and I found it incredibly relaxing in a way. I haven't been back now for quite a few years, which is sad. But I was never ever bored there. That's that's the main thing I remember. It's because I was just always looking at things, and I can't speak Hindi, which is annoying, and I want to learn one day. But I think probably partly because of that, I was always just watching everything and kind of soaking things in.
Yeah. So I am getting a picture though, and I think we got a picture from almost from the jump that you're very much all about the books. And it was a given that you were going to become an author. Well, it's not a given with anything in life, but what you could do and what you could do very well was right. Is that correct in saying like throughout your education system you were excelling within English subjects?
Yes,
And then you
yeah.
just thought to yourself, why not continue that? So let me actually then go to, oh, sorry, go on, Amber.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Yes, you're right. That's it.
Yeah. So that's then you're thinking, what subjects were you thinking to do university? Because you went to, is it Oxford? No, Cambridge.
Cambridge, yeah.
Apologies. Yeah, Cambridge and then Columbia afterwards. So shall we get into that? But before we do, and again, as with always, all my guests, I would like to talk about the second book in which you submitted that made a huge impact within this decade. Do you recall what it was?
Yes,
I can come to you. Yeah.
No, wait, you say.
Wide Sargasso Sea by John Rees. Am I saying that name right?
Jean Rees?
Jean Rees. Okay, I have no idea about this book, so please tell me about it and why that made an impact in your life during this decade.
So in Jane Eyre, there is a mad woman in the attic who's kind of mentioned in passing, called Bertha Rochester. And the reason it caught me is because I'd read Jane Eyre and I hated, but was also fascinated by the fact that I hadn't noticed that, questioned that, thought about it. And I was also like, we read this in class. Someone at some point should have come up as a theme, and it did not. But anyway, this White Sargasso Sea is the story of Bertha Rochester and how she comes to be in the attic. But so it's when we meet her, she's Antoinette Cosway, and Jean Reeves was very much drawing on her experience of her childhood. But so it starts, Jean Reeves lived in Dominica when she was a child and then left at 16, and White Sargasso Sea starts in Jamaica, and you kind of see this woman through her life.
Nah, amazing. And that made an impact on you because
I think they should be taught alongside each other, because it gives a whole different context that doesn't diminish Jane Eyre as a book. If anything, it makes Jane Eyre more interesting. But it's also this borderline mystical feeling where, for me, it's as soon as Jane Eyre was written, this existed somewhere because the story was already there, and the idea. It is such a good book.
did she influence your style in writing? Do you get influenced by other authors and the way they write and their style?
Very much.
You do?
Definitely. I think probably underlying the constant reading is that. But Jean Rees is probably one of my earliest influences. Her style is incredibly clear and strange, but it's also someone said that all of her stories start with a woman sitting in a hotel room waiting for a man to give her money to either buy a dress or buy a drink, which sounds so desolate, and is quite desolate. But there are all these stories where it is, judgmental landladies and quite dreadful men and sipping Pernod at Parisian street cafes, and they are all brilliant, and they sound like they should get samey, and they don't. They're just very zoomed in on very particular experiences, and I guess that influenced me.
I love that. Well, let's go into your final chapter. Not your final chapter, quote unquote, because
My
that's just
final
ridiculous.
chapter, yeah.
Like dun dun dun. No, but in the way stories that stick operate, 20 plus. So we are finding at the tail end of university, starting to really, well, hopefully understand yourself as a fierce woman who's about to really shake the literary world. Unless I'm mistaken, but this is where you need to tell me what was going on from 20 plus and how do we find you to basically write in Wild Pets?
I'm really
Is that
hoping
a
I'll
lot
feel
of...
like that in like 10 years. I'm hoping I'll be like, yes, that is me. I don't feel that way
Yeah.
yet, but I like that description is very kind. Thank you.
Let's go with, I think, well, first and foremost, you studied in Cambridge, right? Mm-hmm. What was your degree in, by the way? Forget.
English,
I
just
don't,
English literature.
just English literature. Okay, got you. Because it's such a, I hate it when people would say, oh, you went to Oxford or Cambridge, and they don't even care to know what you studied there. Like that in of
It's
itself is...
it's a
No, go
very
on.
awkward, like, it's just no, but you're completely right. And it's also, it just feels like a really weird non sequitur and like an oddly charged non sequitur sometimes. And it's just, it's awkward. So yes, English, it's the more interesting part.
Yeah. Amazing. And during this time, what were you writing? What were you thinking to do with it? Were you thinking to be an author? Were you thinking maybe teaching? Or what can you, I guess it's the question is almost what can't you do with English as a degree from Cambridge? But what were you thinking to do professionally?
Well, I've definitely Googled, like, what can you do to make money with an English degree so many times. And there is, there is a list of infinite things. But I was always very much like, I will find a way to make money and I will do whatever I need to do. But I think I kind of had a lack of plan. And like, I ended up teaching at Columbia. Wait, no, jumping backwards, sorry. I wrote a short story collection at Cambridge, which was like, it's just the basic thing of practicing and getting better. They're not good short stories, but they got me further along.
Yeah. But how did Faber's come into play? How does one get an agent? How does one get their book published? There's so many bits in your journey, and I'm sure it
Yeah.
hasn't been easy in the slightest.
No.
So where do you want to take it from?
So I think I went to Columbia with very much the idea that like this would be, it sold, to be careful. So I think now especially I know that doing the MFA was very good for me. I was very confused when I got there because the way Americans talk about university is very different to the way here, and I had sort of fallen for what is essentially advertising. And I had in my head, I was like, I will do this course and then I will get an agent and then I will get published, and that will be very clear steps, which I think is part of what the MFA
Promised.
yeah. And I really should have thought like obviously that's not how it works, because otherwise like the numbers don't make sense of that.
Yeah. Did you do this immediately after you graduated from Cambridge?
So I did an
Was there time in
MPhil
between?
after, I did an MPhil for a year at Cambridge on American literature, in all honesty, partly because I didn't know what I wanted to do and I got funding. So I was just like, I love this work. I didn't think I wanted to be an academic though, because I just didn't. But it kind of made sense at the time. Yeah, it did seem so much like the logical next step that I felt like I'd be missing out. Obviously, I have to go.
And off you went, and then not the rest is history because we still don't know the bridge. So from Columbia, how you find... Yes. Okay.
I can do a truncated bridge. I can do a... No, I'll do a truncated bridge. So I did a thing where you can teach... If you get a job teaching undergraduates, then they give you 2 years of MFA fees. They pay for 2 years of MFA and you get a stipend. And that made everything much better for me because I felt like, well, money, first of all. And also I had a purpose. So that was good. Then I graduated. Then I came back. And I think, I got my PA job. I was writing all the time. And I was still sending out short stories and all the things that everyone does. And I was
when you say sending them out, sorry for the interjection. I hope you don't mind me interjecting. Now, when you say sending it out, sending it to who? And like,
So,
what's the strategy here?
well, so the strategy theory, what I had always been told is that what happens is you get something published, and then someone notices it, and then you approach an agent and say, "I've got this short story published." Unfortunately, I did not get any short stories published. So
Oh.
there's a website called Submittable where you submit things to. I also, my strategy was crap. I was entering all these competitions that have like massive prizes, but also like that's just not a smart way of going about it. But I wanted to feel like I was achieving things, so I just kept entering, and they all have entrance fees, and it's just not a smart way of doing it.
Right.
And then the culmination of all of this is that at the end of, I want to say 2017, I was at a party, and it was like an after party at this point, and someone started talking about Stendhal and the salt mines of Salzburg. And it was very late, and I just had one of those moments where I was mesmerized by what she was saying. Stendhal had this metaphor in a book called On Love, where it's about like projection of ideals around a loved one, and there's, if you throw a twig into the salt mines of Salzburg, all these like crystals cluster around it, and the twig is transformed, and then over time all those crystals fall away. But so from then, that's when I then started writing Wild Pets, because I think I'd been basically like mentally getting ready to be writing, and then that was just the spark that made everything. From then on I was just going.
I want us to then speak about the book, if that's okay, because at the end of the day, this is a kind of press run for you, and it'll be remiss of us not to talk about the book, right?
Sure, yeah.
Do you want to give us an overview on it, and we'll take it from there?
Okay, cool. I can give you my paragraph. I can give you my...
Oh, okay. Have you written a paragraph, have you? Oh,
it's possible. You. I can pretend I'm just... Yeah, no, I have.
All right. The floor's yours. But we'll pretend like, you just said it off the top of your head.
It's deeply embedded in my head at this point. So, like, it's about a group of 20-somethings moving between London and New York, trying to reconcile their ambition and their need to love and be loved. So there's Iris, who goes to New York to write, Ezra, whose band has started making waves, and Nance, who's studying and has started hooking up with an older academic. They're dealing with various mental health problems and the fallout from the ways in which they all self-medicate. The story also unfolds during the Me Too movement and against the backdrop of Trump's administration. So you've got this group of characters really questioning their political ideologies and ideas around agency and consent. It's really, to me, though, it's about how we narrativize our relationships, how we self-mythologize, and the ways, especially in your 20s, you're kind of making yourselves and making each other up all the time.
And that is Wild Pets, for sure. The book is available when?
July 1st.
Amber, I often leave with this one question. If there's any one book, apart from the ones you've already mentioned, what book would you gift to loved ones, like friends and loved ones, and why? Okay, yes.
Yes. But so there's The Writing Life by Annie Dillard, which if you want to be writing an aunt, it's just the best like creative shock ever. It's very good.
Repeat that. The
Writing Life by Annie Dillard. It's so good. And also any of the Olive books by Elizabeth Strout. She has a thing where characters from some novels have cameos in others. It's just their whole world's her books. So that would be my other one, yeah.
Amazing. And I tell you what's refreshing, and I don't know whether I'm mistaken in saying this, but all the books you've mentioned, they're written by female authors, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know when that happened. It wasn't a deliberate... It's not a deliberate thing. I was looking at my bookshelves, and I do read men, but I do read mainly women.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm also just trying to build up my own canon, which we weren't taught, and I like getting a sense of where everyone is in relation to each other as well.
No, I love that. I can actually even picture that. Well, Amber, thank you very much for your time. And so and it depends, would you like to be found on the World Wide Web? And if yes, what would you like us to do when we do find you? So I guess the question is, where can we find you if you'd like to be found? And what would you like us to do?
I'm on Instagram, just Amber Medland. I am also on Twitter, although I do that less. I don't know, read the book. If you want to chat about Nella Larsen or Jean Rhys, by all means message me. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time. And guys, as always, do stay tuned for another episode of Stories That Stick. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please do share it. And if you'd like to be featured on the podcast, please do get in touch.